Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in the House and speak on behalf of the good people of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry. Also proud that I'll be sharing my time today with the great new member we have in our caucus from Edmonton Northwest. As an official opposition, we have a role to hold the government to account on what they promise and what they deliver. In many cases, we have with this new Prime Minister, but same old Liberal government is. They talk a big game, they have these photo ops and make these flashy announcements, but the follow-up, it leaves something to be desired. The Prime Minister himself said when he was sworn in with the Cabinet that he wanted to be judged by the prices Canadians pay at the grocery store. Well, I'm happy to do that, but unfortunately it's not the best of news when it comes to the situation that we face in my part of Eastern Ontario in the city of Cornwall with the Agape Centre. The Agape Centre, with Lisa Duprow and her staff and the many volunteers that make the place what it is an incredible organization that runs a food bank, that runs a store and a kitchen that helps thousands of local residents each and every year. They held their AGM last month, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to, through you, advise the House of some pretty alarming statistics when it comes to affordability, when it comes to the state of our economy here in Canada, and specifically the microcosm in Cornwall. There were 40,000 visits made to the food bank, Agape Food Bank, in Cornwall alone last year. That is in a city of 47,000 people. Visits were up 193% in the last 4 years. And children using the food bank is up 257%. Between the kitchen and the food bank, the Agape Centre processed 1 million pounds of food for those in need, with a value at $3.6 million. And they are affected too by the increased usage and the increased cost of food, because that is a 10% increase just from the previous year. I want to quote the Executive Director, Lisa Duprow, when she said, quote, "The urgency of the situation cannot be overstated. People are skipping meals, taking on unsustainable debt, and stepping further away from a life of dignity." That's the record of this Liberal government over the course of the last 10 years. And when we look at the last 6 months of this Prime Minister, the situation is only getting worse. Food inflation is 70% above the target of where the target inflation rate for it should be. And Canadians are going to be spending an extra $800 on groceries as a family this year is the expected average, with no relief in sight. Because one of the things that we know and we have been saying for years, and which continues to be shown in higher food inflation, higher housing prices, and higher deficits, is that those higher deficits and money printing leads to inflation, leads to that pressure. Mr. Speaker, it's not sustainable what we've seen for the last number of years under these Liberals, and we're seeing that live and in living color, a sad, sad reality just through one food bank in Cornwall alone. A key part of any government, in order to be successful, in order to grow the economy, to have a sustainable future, is getting investment in this country. And what we have seen, the numbers speak for themselves. Since the Prime Minister came into office, we've seen $54 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars in investment leave this country for the United States. Over the course of the last 5 years, that number has been $500 billion. Why? It is the management, or the lack thereof of good management, from the Liberals to create an economic environment through good taxes, creating good opportunities for jobs, creating an atmosphere that businesses want to bring direct foreign investment from around the world in. We've seen $500 million leave Canada for the United States because that's where they prefer to do business. If that wasn't bad enough, and that rate, if that continued at that rate for the next 5 years going forward, wasn't bad enough, this week when the Prime Minister visited Washington, it was another major concession with no deal. He's already conceded on counter tariffs. He already conceded on the digital service tax. And then he said in his comments right in the Oval Office of the White House that he would pledge as some part of deal that they were working on that would see $1 trillion of Canadian investment money go to the United States in the next 5 years, double the rate of what we've already lost. That is absolutely ridiculous. It is an absolute betrayal of Canadians and Canadian workers in this country. Because what does that mean? That is $1 trillion the Prime Minister put on the table with nothing in return except those dollars going and being used in the United States. Just imagine if that $1 trillion would be invested, Canadian dollars, be invested in Canada in the next 5 years instead. But no, what are we going to see? We're going to see a factory either be closed in Ontario, or if one brand new one's going to be built, it won't be built in Ontario, but rather be built over in the state of Michigan or Ohio. We're going to see, as opposed to a new mine being built and developed in British Columbia, the red tape and the regulation takes 25 years in many cases to get a permit for a mine in Northern Ontario, BC, and other parts of this country. So as opposed to seeing that investment and jobs created in British Columbia as an example, or Northern Ontario, they'd be going to West Virginia or Washington. In a new business, someone with dollars in Canada, as opposed to opening up a new business, say, in Nova Scotia, they'll open up in the state of Maine instead. This at a time we could least afford it. The Prime Minister's record, as an official opposition, we have a responsibility to hold this government to account. He said he was going to create new jobs here in Canada. Since he became Prime Minister alone, 86,000 jobs have been lost, including in the city of Cornwall with Ridgewood Industries, 300 jobs gone in our community just in the last couple of months. This is not sustainable. And over and over and over again, we just see the Liberal government repeating the same failed approaches. And we're now seeing a Prime Minister going out and openly advocating and creating deals with the United States with nothing in return that's going to see $1 trillion of Canadian investment money leave our country and flow down south. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows that very well because he did that just before he became Prime Minister when he was the chair of Brookfield. Brookfield is part of that. I mentioned that $500 billion of Canadian money that moved to the United States in the last 5 years. The Prime Minister's own company, Brookfield, was one of those when they moved their headquarters to New York City, leading by example in completely the wrong way. We need to see some fiscal responsibility from this government. After 10 years, and we thought Justin Trudeau was expensive, the Prime Minister is making him look like a penny pincher. Hold my beer, as the expression would say, absolutely. Of where we actually see the independent parliamentary budget officer predict that the deficits this new Prime Minister, with the same old Liberal government and same old Liberal team, are adopting the same old failed approaches. Endless deficits, never-ending deficits with no plan to balance the budget. And they are double, the deficits are at least double what Justin Trudeau's deficits were going to be, according to the parliamentary budget officer. Every dollar government spends comes from the pockets of Canadians. It adds to higher taxes. It adds to higher food costs. It adds to a higher cost of living. It adds to a higher cost for housing. And we're not seeing a good investment, a good return on investment on the tax dollars the Liberals are spending. So as we have our Opposition Day motion here, that every dollar that leaves our country and flees an investment is less jobs and lower wages. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the aisle, we're going to stand up for Canadian workers, for Canadian investments, for a brighter Canadian future. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the member opposite. Obviously, it's clear that the Prime Minister Trudeau is still part of their economic plan and their plan to government, and even though it didn't work in the last election, perhaps the member opposite can tell us why he thinks that the child tax benefit is a waste of money, a tax that has uplifted over 400,000 children out of poverty, why he thinks that investing in childcare across this nation and economic policy is a waste of money. And what is the obsession of talking down on Canadians and Canada? Today, in question period, we heard almost every question from the Conservatives talking down Canada. What did they have to actually offer Canadians?
The Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry.
I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm proud to stand up for Canada. What I'm ashamed of and what I'm criticizing is the Liberal government. That is what we are talking about here. And you'll notice in there, they are doing everything they possibly can today to talk down their own former Prime Minister. They don't want us talking about Justin Trudeau anymore. But, Mr. Speaker, here's the reality of the situation. Justin Trudeau may be gone, but the new Prime Minister is making the situation even worse financially. Larger deficits, more spending, our immigration system's in chaos. There's no end to housing. We need to build more houses. We're actually seeing things slow down. Example after example after example. He didn't make a promise. He made the promise he'd get a deal with the United States, and he's broken that promise. And he's leading just in the same record, the same disastrous financial record that Justin Trudeau had. They're not a new government. It's the same tired Liberal Party.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires, honorable.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie, Les Îles de la Madeleine, Listagouge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to greet my colleague. I commend him for his passionate speech. When talking about public finances, the issue is that there's not enough transparency. Right now, we don't even have a budget. In the credits that were tabled in June, we did notice certain things, little increase in transfers to individuals, and an explosion in spending to keep the federal government running. 26% increase in consultation fees. Military purchases, raise salaries in the public service. What does my colleague think of this initial outlook on the economy? I would say yes. There are major issues with transparency under this Liberal government and their budgets and their finances.
Problem with the transparency when it comes to this Liberal government. I can be probably longer than the 30 seconds I have to elaborate on that. But I will agree, we are seeing consultant spending go up significantly. This was after the Prime Minister said that he was going to cap spending at 2%. The first bill that he tabled increased spending by 8%. Billions of dollars more on consultants. And now I just want to put a thing number $742 million in a gun confiscation program that their own Minister of Public Safety said won't be effective. There are so many examples of waste that have come from this government where if that were back in the pockets of Canadians, maybe they could afford food themselves.
Questions and comments to Honourable Member for King Vaughan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, we have a serious situation in this country. There's 86,000 people out of work. And earlier today, during question period, the Minister of Foreign Affairs stated that they're going to support the Canadian population with EI. The people in my community don't want EI. They want jobs. They want to work. How would he address that?
Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry.
Couldn't agree more on just how tone deaf the Minister of Foreign Affairs was today when we were talking about the importance of the auto sector and supporting auto workers and mill workers right across this country, is that their answer was, well, don't worry, we're going to give them extra weeks of EI. Absolutely out of touch. And the member couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it any better. They want a job. They want good pay, good benefits, good pension, a reasonable home to live in, and have food that they could afford to feed their family with. And that's sad after 10 years of these Liberals and the continuation with a new Prime Minister. It's the same old Liberal Party. And here they are, Canadians are struggling over and over and over again to meet the basic necessities. It's shameful, the country they've created after 10 years.
Way to go, Aaron.